Okay. So my name is Muram Shaheen. I'll be presenting the German pavilion, Unexpected Permanence in Khartoum, Sudan. The presentation is structured around three main moments or timelines. The first is the historical and political context. The second will be the pre-exhibition timeline leading to the pavilion's launch. And the third will be the building's lifespan and its afterlife. Um, the first timeline is as I said, it's going to be the historical and political timeline. I'm going to walk you through a couple of events that it like occurred till the 1956 in Sudan independence. The defeat of Germany in 1949 after the Second World War. It has led to FRG and the DDR, the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic, which is East Germany and West Germany. This has subsequently set a stage for intense rivalry, seeking international recognition. Before the pavilion, the Northwest German Trade Fair, it was initiated by British occupying forces in 1947, and that was to counterpart the pre-war role of the well-established Leipzig Trade Fair. It's very important to note that the trade fairs have played an important role in the politics of the German world. In 1955, the Holstein Doctrine, which is a foreign policy principle of the Federal Republic of Germany, it was announced. It was announced to sought to isolate the GDR from international community, and it stated that the Federal Republic of Germany wouldn't establish or maintain any democratic diplomatic relations with any states that recognize the German Democratic Republic. The political interactions in Africa, including Sudan. Okay. The timeline here is very critical because when the Holstein Doctrine was announced, the Sudanese National Assembly voted for independence of Sudan from the British Egyptian colony. Hindered by the doctrine and Sudan quasi-diplomatic status, East Germany, East Germany struggled to form international official diplomatic relations within Africa and the whole world. The GDR had efforts to open a liaison office in Sudan, whilst the British Foreign Office has judged that they wouldn't intervene. Doctrine was announced. Its ambassador Heinrich de Haas, which is German, the German ambassador Heinrich de Haas has threatened Sudanese officials that the West German would cut all relations if a GDR opened the liaison. And upgrading the status. Okay. Okay. This has tested Sudan's strategy by weakening Eastern international legitimacy and preventing diplomatic recognition. The FRG established diplomatic liaison office successfully. The FRG, the West Germany, established in 1953, which later became a legation and been upgraded to an embassy. On the other hand, from the exhibition's point of view, here I'm going to talk specifically about the inner German post-war relations that we were escalating to win a rivalry of international legitimacy. It was evident that in 1953, GDR and Egypt, they made a trade agreement. Within the same year, FRG has showed interest in exhibiting its wares in Cairo, and GDR followed with the exhibition in 1954. In March 1957, the FRG staged an exhibition in a Jazeera island. Ironically, the here and the same location. This has shows like the rivalry right before, like they were working on the same timeline. The exhibitions in Cairo were platforms to connect Sudanese delegates, and at this point, the FRG and the GDR both they expressed interest in exhibiting in Sudan. During the rise of Communist Party in Sudan and the coup d'etat attempt in 1958, 1958, East Germans has proposed to Sudanese authority to organize an industry exhibition in Khartoum, but the Sudanese government, they declined the offer. This was due to Sudan's quasi-diplomatic status with the USA and Great Britain, indicating that Sudan hasn't achieved its full independence yet. Okay, moving on to the pavilion lifespan. The pavilion itself, it was finally constructed by the Republic of Germany, West Germany, in 1961, and this was months after Berlin Wall, construction of Berlin Wall, and it shows a modern design in Khartoum. The modern design was also evident in the mural structure, the same structure for urban planning exhibition that was held at the Interbau of Tomorrow, which was almost occurring within the same timeline, which is quote unquote embody the shape of the future. The engineering of space frame knots and members, they made them easy to erect, dismantle, and achieve a modular concept. The design brief required the exhibition to be a lightweight structure in addition to the financial logic that commanded the very fast pace. The exhibition needed to be rapidly constructed. It was obliged to be flexible, erectable, and express, of course, the corporate identity of Krupp, and also sought to reflect the Germanness of the state. So it showed like German traditions, Bavarian orchestra, and served like traditional German sausage on site on its on-ground restaurant. Okay. This is the original plan of the exhibition, the original program. The exhibition, I'm currently moving to pavilion lifespan. The exhibition, it was, the halls were 6 halls, modular halls, and they were suitable, the modular design was suitable for prefabricated installations. The site, it was approximately 64,000 square meters and consisted, as I said, 6 prefabricated steel structure. The main rectangular exhibition was exhibition number 5. Can you see my cursor? Number
Yes,
5.
we
So
can.
this was okay. This is the main rectangular exhibition, and the other 2 symmetric exhibitions were number 1 and 2. The number 4 is a symmetric structure with number 1 and 2, but it was used for informations and inquiry as it was closer to the entrance. The other service structures and auxiliary buildings, they were later dismantled, and the site also had has on-ground exhibition, open air cinema, and abundant landscape. On its ground was constructed one of the very first fountains in Sudan, and they had like a show with a program, and it was designed along with a large pool, which we're gonna see later in the presentation. In 1962, the governments of Sudan and the FRG, they agreed to use the main structures of the buildings of the industrial exhibition as a vocational training center named Khartoum Ithnain Vocational Training Center, which is located right along Africa Street or Al-Matar or across the airport. Also named Al-Almani, which translates to German, the German center in Arabic. Auxiliary structures were dismantled and shipped back to Germany between 1962 and 1964. The other equipments were shipped as support of it was a whole program of like vocational training, partnership between FRG and okay. Next thing is like the exhibition or the center was operating since 1964 till 2022 till erupted in the situation. Over time, the site has been subjected to privatization and fragmentation. The current site area has decreased to nearly 40%, as you can see in the as-built survey. So here the main workshop, which is number 5, the main exhibition, it was adapted to the main workshop. It offered 4 specializations, and the 2 workshops, 1 and 2, the 2 other symmetric exhibitions were adapted to workshops for aluminum and carpentry. And number 4, it was previously information and inquiries, and it was reused as a storage but left abandoned till 2022. Some additions were about with other organizations such as JICA, which has developed the part of the construction department, which is number 3, and the other auxiliary or supporting buildings uh, of the training center. The exhibition or the outdoor exhibition ground itself, it has been privatized as main areas adjacent to the main streets are now used for commercial purposes. It has restaurants, retail areas, and clubs such as the German Club and Khartoum Club. The exhibition modernity, it was also evident in the materiality. The architect George Lipsmeyer, he has discussed the materiality in his book Building in the Tropics, addressing the aluminium characteristics are impermeable to rain, water, and airtight, non-porous, reflective. But there's a major disadvantage of using aluminium in such hot arid climates such as Sudan is the high thermal conductivity.
Sorry for the interruption. Just
Wrap up.
Yeah,
I have,
good.
I have, okay, I have a couple to slides. Okay, it was apparent also in the use of the building, which has utilized local bricks, appears in the photo, which is adapted to the main general exhibition hall, the general workshops. This is the interior. It's apparent that they used locally sourced brick, and can move. This is panoramic view of the workshop. It shows the interior. This is also the exhibition restaurant. It was originally an open air hall with locally sourced, and now the reuse with locally sourced brick parameter. That was during the reuse. I'm gonna wrap up because of the time. The German pavilion here, like I chose the German pavilion to present it because it shows how temporary architecture takes on unexpected permanence beyond short-term purposes. In case of the German pavilion, diplomatic and cultural purposes. This positions temporality as evolving condition rather than a design intent. I'll conclude the German pavilion following the eruption as a final reflection of time.
So the Khartoum International Fair has an architecture that is shaped by deadlines and the construction speed, and also the international calendars. I think that modernity arrived not as a gradual evolution, but also as a rapid reorganization of the time itself. And also, I think that this transformation distributed both ecological and historical, the continuity of the fair, and that appeared in replacing the former colonial military site with a sample of post-colonial ambition, and also appeared in turning the urgency into a national sample within a span of only 1 year. So we would be talking in more detail about the regarding the timelines and the firm's involvement with the first international fair. So for the historical projects of the building, we find that the fair projects stand on how architecture can regulate time and compress it, and also transform it by representing a rupture in the temporal of a place, because by January 1977, the site of what would become the Khartoum First International Fair was described mainly as a stripe of desert marked by thorn trees in the edge of the Blue Nile. There was no building, no infrastructure, and also no indication that within a year this land would host the first international fair. By January 1978, and the same ground hosted countries for the first international fair, showing that time became the defining architectural behind the Khartoum International Fair, because the project began not with drawings but also with a moment, as recorded that the main idea of the fair oriented when the exhibition consultants sent a buffalo into Khartoum explaining the similar project elsewhere in the world. And the Sudanese government was under the President Jafar Nimeri back then, and the Ministry of Public Work immediately recognized an opportunity of an international exhibition. So also we find that time strategically appear and shaped it kinda, because it in this case was the decision for the Khartoum or the fair annual to be held into two main reasons, because it was the most favorable time in Khartoum and Sudan in general. Also, it was the during the gap of the global exhibition trade calendar. So the project carried a political function by strengthening Sudan regional and international profile, as by the end of the first edition, the Sudan had been selected to host the third African trade fair in 1980. And the project also interrogated the significant social technical agenda, where the Sudanese government required that all the imported system, including the node-based system for the roofs of the main pavilions, the four main pavilions, assembled by Sudanese labor and their British supervision. So the approach ensured that the fairgrounds not only represented or as a monumental architectural achievement, but also served as an instrument for the building national technical experiences and in expanding the capacity of Sudan construction workforce. Regarding to the Date Commission, the construction unfolded under an extremely compressed schedule. So once the decision was made, the schedule became relentless, because the consultants were appointed in January 1976, and the site was selected by March, and the scheme design began around June. And by December 2000, and by December 29, 1976, the first concrete was poured. Regarding to this point, the internal phase of construction for the Khartoum International Fairground relied heavily on the physical characteristics of the site, and also on the capabilities of the Sudanese workforce inside. Because as documented in a New African article in 1978, that all the pavilion foundation were installed manually by Sudanese workers who worked with the ground condition that were softened by the seasonal rain. And from that moment onward, the construction proceeded in extraordinary speed. So for the architectural firms and designers, the lead architects and design team leader for the fair were the architects co-partnership, and and the landscape and site graphics were designed by James Sutton, and also the civil and structural engineering were by Sutherland and Harris and Sutherland partnership. And we found that beyond the professional design team, the Ministry of Public Work played a central role in design approval and also in engineering supervision and the technical of the construction drawings and also the legal ownership of the fairground were in the hand of the Ministry of Trade, and operational responsibility later shifted to the Sudan Free Zone and Market Company, which is assembled out of some the management and scheduling and marketing until the last edition of the fair before April 2023. Internationally, the project was supported also by the European Economic and by the European Economic Community, which has provided both the financial and technical assistance, and alongside the participation of the Arab League and the Bank of Economic Development in Africa. So, as we mentioned before, that the fair hosted a 27 participation country in the first edition, and multiple commercial delegation, also the industrial exhibitors, and around 40 of Sudanese local companies. There's a provided list of all the countries that were attending the first edition, and also the companies and the countries that were involved. We can briefly go on the general design description for the site, just for a better understanding. So, okay. So in the first, sorry. In the first location plan that showed in numbers, we find that 1 is represent the site of the Khartoum International Fair, and 2 is the Blue Nile, and 3 is Khartoum, 4 is Bahri, and 5 is the White Nile, and and 6 is Omdurman. In the site location of the project, we find that 1 is representing the 4 main pavilions in the Khartoum International Fair, and 2 is the administration building, 3 was the parking, and 4 was the service bad area was a service bad area for the temporal kind of exhibitions and companies, and the local companies, Sudanese local companies. 5 was the pedestrian mall, and 6 was the restaurant, and 7 were the hotel that was meant to welcome all the visitors from outside Sudan. I don't know how much time left, but we can move to the...
we have a couple of minutes left, so
okay.
Yeah, you can go through the rest of the slides.
Okay. So this, all the photographs are showing the site, the general site of the main pavilion, and also the front of the mall and the pedestrian walkways, and also it shows the artificial lakes and the general landscape of the main pavilions. Okay. In these pictures, despite the local material or use of the pavilion in the pavilion architecture, a Sudanese regional pavilion rested on the bad area, were mainly choose to be done by the space frame, and the node system was important and was similar to the node system that we used in Birmingham Expo in England, in much a larger scale. Also, locally produced concrete tiles were paved in the mall here. The locally produced concrete tiles were paved on the mall and pedestrian byways, while local stone and reinforced landscape were edges in the wall. And I guess we'll be moving to the next. Okay. So also in the logistic side, we found that time also shaped logistics as well, because Khartoum is 400 miles from Port Sudan, and the rail system was congested as the deadline approached, and specialized British materials were flown directly to the site of Khartoum International Fair. Late decision and emergency shipment, and also the increasing of the cost was a lot of the reasons, but yet these pressures were expected as necessary to meet the immovable opening date of the fair. Meanwhile, the landscape and the artificial lakes were undergoing in its own temporal transformation, and also it was moving symbolically from a desert to savanna to the dense forest, turned it into a public park that was mainly intended to function year-round between fairs. For the general assessments on the cultural and historical and social evolution of the fair, overall, the fairgrounds stand as one of the Sudan's most significant modern architectural and infrastructural achievement, interrogating a
Yousra,
technical.
sorry
Yeah,
for the interruption again,
yeah,
but I would
problem.
like that to wrap it up.
Yeah,
We're a
problem.
bit touched with our time. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So as well, also the fairground embody an exceptional scenics of engineering and as an accomplishment, and the architecture evaluation and the cultural representation at the time, and also the geopolitical ambition into making them uniquely significant for modernist complex. And I think that the project, it was and is to be celebrated for the longevity of it and for keeping the track between all these years. But I think for a long time, it was also standing in the same familiar shadows that were mainly focusing into making it more economical based. And as we see that it was created to work equally in cultural and social aspects as well. So I think it wasn't limited as much it was meant to be. It was meant to be limited. So yeah, I think that's all we have today. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Starting off quickly, so my research was one that started with a course in AUS with Berjil Art Foundation and Sheikh Sultan. And this is just a brief summary of it. So I always start my presentations when we talk about time with this slide. And this slide is just an image of the aftermath of Chernobyl. And then I asked myself the question, did the architect know what was going to happen, or was there any idea of what he was designing? Was it even an architect? What was it? And the aftermath of it. And then when humans stepped out and we gave it some time, um, what ended up happening is that Earth took back, or nature came back and took over the place. And I find that very interesting in what uh, we see this pattern happening not only with nature coming back, but with when time passes, what happens to buildings. And that's essentially the topic today, echoes of absence, architecture and art as witnesses. And our topic will talk about when people leave, what happens. So it starts off with this quote of "You're forgotten as if you never existed, forgotten as if you were never news or trace," which was said by Mahmoud Darwish. And it doesn't make sense to everyone. It makes sense to some people, and everyone interprets it in their own way. And I find that interesting because the way I interpreted it is that it's an experience of one losing their homeland or having to leave it. And then when they leave it, everyone forgets it. And then we try our best to soften it up by euphemisms like pursuing a better opportunity or chasing the dream. But there is no dream because I've lost my country. I've had to leave it to find or search for home somewhere else. And I find that interesting because then when I leave, what's left behind? Another quote I really like is by George Louis Borges, who says, "The taste of the apple lies in the contact of the fruit with the palate, not the fruit itself." And then when you look at this, the reason why I relate to Mahmoud Darwish's quote is because I see something in it in losing one's homeland, because the country I call home is not the country I'm from. And then again, here, I delve deeper into how we look at art and architecture as exercises in poetry. Architecture is heavily dependent on artistic, it's very philosophical. And then we talk about how when forms in art, it's not the pigment, it's not the material used in the building that gives you the feeling of memory and emotion, but it's how we interact with the form and how we get to live within it. And then the question then which is raised is, how do structures and works of art endure, bearing witness to the passage of time and the transformation of people? So this is where we start. The question is, who are the silent witnesses when one leaves? The chalet Raja Saab, designed by architect Ferdinand Daguer, who is a Lebanese architect, is one of these projects that has a lot of artistic influence behind it. It was very modern. It was one of its time. And another project by Oscar Niemeyer, a Brazilian that made his way to Lebanon, uh, is one that was also meant to propel Lebanon forward. And this is a picture of both architects, Oscar Niemeyer on the right, Ferdinand on the left, and where they were on site with Tripoli, on Tripoli International Fair. Starting off with Raja Saab, the chalet. This is what the chalet looked like when it first opened. It was the first of its kind, opening right on the Acapulco, back then called Acapulco Beach, which is one of the most famous beaches in Lebanon. Unfortunately, now it doesn't exist because this building, this chalet, made this process of building on the beach, and then the beach got too dense, and then no one's then you can't swim anymore. It became too polluted. These are images of it when it first opened. These images date back from 1954, and they're from the archives of Ferdinand Daguer. When looking at these images, one could see in a way it's this UFO, and the entry is only through the bottom, and the entry is one that has its own panoramic view. Um, then from the inside, it's split into four rooms that each have their distinct views. And the furniture inside isn't furniture bought off a shelf. It's furniture that was designed by French designers, especially for this chalet. On the bottom, you have four structural columns that extrude the building upwards, which gives you this plaza space that was used by the owners of the house. And this is the only entry you have to the building. Once that door is locked, you can't enter anymore. Now shifting gears and looking at Triple International Fair. Here again we see Oscar Niemeyer and Ferdinand Daguerre because they both worked on the project, but it was fully designed by Oscar Niemeyer. This was Tripoli before Oscar Niemeyer. This is Tripoli after Oscar Niemeyer. This 70-hectare site was the one that was given to Oscar Niemeyer for him to design. It was such a huge project. Um, oops. And then the project has its own modernist features, such as there's a helicopter pad on it, so that the president would land his helicopter. There was the pavilions in which this would be filled with water, and there's this language of landscape and what's inside and what's outside, and it was very much a fair for leisure. There was an outdoor theater for music to take place, and an indoor theater. Keep in mind, this was at 1960s, where music was very big in Lebanon and the Middle East region. And then this all raises the question of, are architects really in control? Because we talked about how they designed and how everything was split up and how everything was very precise. Looking at the chalet again, this image, this is what the chalet is now. So comparing this image in which how we have this plaza has completely disappeared now. And the reason after this, a lot of political issues happened and the chalet was completely abandoned, in which other people took place and they kept playing with the form until it made sense to them, or in a way, it started accommodating what they want. So the architecture now is getting changed by informal architects or people that don't even call themselves architects. Here we see that the building is almost unrecognizable, and currently one could not see the UFO form or this floating element anymore. It's more a cluster of a lot of things happening at once. We've seen this in Lebanon, where in the poorer areas, people start creating elements that could help them live and give their building structure. And this is what the building is now. Small elements have been added. I think these are like water tanks on them, and has really changed. The building now houses four refugee families, each living in each room, and it has slowly disappeared. This is what the beach looks like now. You can't swim there anymore. And when reading about it, people really wish they could, but it's too polluted. Now looking at Triple International Fair and looking what happened to that, after Triple International Fair was almost getting finished up and polished, the Lebanese Civil War happened, in which what then, with the aftermath of that, is the fair never got to see its end, and it got destroyed, and it was occupied by three different armies at different times. Lebanese, Syrian, and at once Israeli armies. It was taken over, and then because it was essentially in a very strategic location that was close to the port of the city, so it was perfect. What's very ironic is that there was this tower in which people would go up and you'd be able to see the entire fair. It was used to oversee military action, military movements within the country or within Tripoli. And then on the inside, there's a lot of drawings and stuff showing us the remnants of these people taking over. The cladding on the walls were all stripped, and one guy said he lived near the site. He said that even toilets were being stolen, which I find amusing. And then looking at the theater on the inside, it was used as a slaughterhouse, which is very ironic because Oscar Niemeyer, in a way, designed it for it to become a theater and not a slaughterhouse. And that's how the function changed. This is what Tripoli International Fair is now. It's slowly coming back. Renovation is slowly taking place, and they even had a music festival in 2022 where the theaters were used for music. And then the question is, if it all disappears, what will we remember? And this is when I interviewed Yasmin Dagher, which is the granddaughter and now an architect of under Ferdinand Dagher, which has passed. She says, I don't know how my grandfather would react to what has changed, but she is glad that people still live in it. And she believes that now the building, you really don't know what it looks like and you can't see the form anymore. She argues that the damage buildings have suffered in Lebanon due to a lot of political issues are a part of identity. So she believes they should be preserved. And she believes that innovation is always cheaper than building new. And she believes modern buildings can heal, but only with the right mentality. She says that if we keep rapidly changing our architecture, we lose identity. And she talks about her grandmother, how her grandmother keeps saying her house is the house that's behind the green fence. And that essentially looking at that, the architectural style and the spatial memories can still identify the house and still identify the home. And if we keep modernizing and destroying and building again, then we would lose all of that. So architecture reminds people of their country and what they went through. If it all disappears, what will we remember? And then now looking at the art aspect, when I interviewed artist Muhammad Saad Baalbaki, he says, I believe belonging to a place isn't something you learn, it's something that's already within you, which means that you don't learn how to belong. You don't teach yourself how to call something home. It gets called home slowly after time. And he says it's memories, both the sweet and the bitter. And these are things that are planted deep within you. Them. And I find this very interesting because after Muhammad Saad al-Baki left Lebanon and he went to Berlin to continue his studies and to continue his work, all of the art he produced in Berlin were art of bags stacked on top of each other. And when I interviewed him, I was like, what do the bags represent? He said, it represents my connection to Lebanon. I was like, in what way? He says that these bags is what he remembers of Lebanon because of this ongoing connection to having to leave the country at some point because of the political action. So he says our bags were always on top of each other, ready to get moved, ready to be opened up and closed up and to leave the country immediately. And then he started asking himself questions. What do I remember of Lebanon other than the bags? Because this connection to his homeland was one that was expressed through art because how he had to leave. He keeps when I kept asking him, does he call Berlin home, and does he call it home? He says Berlin is not home and he wishes he could go back to Beirut in Lebanon, but it isn't the best idea. And that's basically it. Ending it, the question is, as architects ever fully in control of our work once it enters the world, and should we understand its alteration by people, use, and time as loss or a part of its purpose? So when whatever we produce, whatever we keep hours upon hours designing reaches the world and then gets changed, whether through political issues or people changing it and forging it, should we say that this is a loss or should we say that this is a part of its purpose? And that's all I have for today. It's a bit rushed because I only have had 15 minutes, but thank you all.
All right, so my name is Rahiem Shadad. I'm a cultural curator and researcher. And as Asya said, I used to run Downtown Gallery in Sudan. I'm currently focused on studying modernism or modernist art movement in Sudan, the influences that has created the modernist movements as we know it today, and answering questions about whether these movements can be considered to be local nation building, Sudanese inspired, or are they a form of elitism and colonial influence? And that kind of the case study of today that I'm about to present It's a reflection of my curiosity. It's an invitation for research. It's not a historical study in any sort of way. And it also goes into the question of the pendulum of whether our artistic modern expression are local, or are they a Eurocentric in a way or another, or foreign influenced, basically. And for the presentation, I want to talk about North Kordofan, and I do believe a lot of people in the presentation probably know a lot about this region. North Kordofan is geographically in the center of Sudan, and it is a region that is very, very multicultural, very cosmopolitan for so many years and decades. And it's a space of movement. It's a space where throughout different periods of time, different ethnic groups and tribes, they either move to it or from it, and that has kind of shaped how sort of this region functions, and also the way the market centers and the different spaces sort of accommodate these regular and frequent movements. So this is a little bit of a sort of like a map of like as you can see in the corner there, of like the different movements that you would see. These movements are very related to the seasons, basically, like the autumn season or the rain season. You would have groups that would migrate from the north towards the south to reach the area of Al Ubaid, maybe south from Al Ubaid, for basically for food, basically, or for vegetation. And you have groups that would migrate within that same season from the south towards the north to avoid insects, because the rainy season in sort of like South Kordofan area, it might be might be too much water, too much mud that would cause their cattle to get sick. So they would migrate to slightly drier areas just to protect themselves from these insects. This seasonal, this relationship basically that they have with time, with seasons, is as obvious, very vernacular. Yeah, sorry, there's someone saying. Yes, so this relationship they have with seasons is very vernacular. It's very basically ethnocentric in a way or another, and also it is a form of lived knowledge. Time here is a necessity, it's survival, it's prosperity, but it's also now, as they move into these cities, there's an influence that happened to the market, which is what I call here the metropolitan, and it kind of repurposes the city. So, so you have seasonality that causes a gathering in the market spaces, and in this example, we're talking about Al Ubaid. Gathering turns into performance. Performance turns into cultural expression. So the case study that I want to talk about is Mahrajan al-Kharif, or the Festival of the Rain, quote unquote, which started in 2010. And although I really tried to research like how exactly it started, like who got the idea, who formed it, who talked to the government, I couldn't find specific names that started this. And it really just shows how organic this festival started. So this basically, the Mahrajan al-Kharif is this event that happens with the autumn season in Al Ubaid, where different artists, different performers, people from theater, musicians, they would create different performances, events, exhibitions, sort of aligning themselves with that time of the year and with the different groups that are existing with the city, sort of entertaining them and creating a kind of like a touristic behavior to the space. I also found a very interesting document in 2015 that there was a conversation between certain groups asking them for funding and asking them to make the Mahrajan al-Kharif a permanent, frequent activity of Al-Ubaid. In the document as well, when you read further into it, you find out that the government of Sudan, in fact, and the state of North Kordofan was actually very much aware of this seasonality, and they were actually starting to build resorts and sort of, I want to say like hotels, but I don't think that's the correct word. But they were forming the city to accommodate this this sort of seasonality of it. A very interesting space that started to host a lot of the activities of the Kharif, and not just Mahrajan al-Kharif, but throughout different periods before Mahrajan al-Kharif, was the Alliance Française. And this is very interesting because Alliance Française, specifically in North Kordofan, is kind of like this space and group of refuge in a way or another. You have these multiple researchers, cultural practitioners, artists, anthropologists even, who gather through this space. And they're not necessarily joined by the French language as you might expect. They're actually joined by their interest in the city, the research that they do to the different ethnic groups in the city, in the space, and the idea that they've been prosecuted one way or another. Like when you read into Dr. Haider, who's the director of Alliance Française, you see him mentioning that a lot of the people within this community were at some point or another prosecuted by the Sudanese government. It was established in 1989. Has hosted so many exhibitions throughout the year. If you read into any artist from North Kordofan or is living in North Kordofan, they would tell you they exhibited in this space at one point or another. And we have Salah Abdelrahiem, who is a phenomenal example of sort of this artistic expression that was influenced by the seasonality of North Kordofan. Salah Abdelrahim's entire artistic statement is based on the different groups that he would see as they move through the city. And he actually would follow them, like to the point he started to go to their, let's say, regions of origin, and created an entire collection of artworks and style of artwork that is based on this ethnocentric study. He used to be a teacher also in Kordofan University, and he lived in Al-Ubaid between 1989 to 2018. I met him in Khartoum in 2020, and I actually exhibited his work at the gallery. The artwork you see in this presentation are all his artwork. So this presentation, very short, but as I said, it's an invitation for research, an invitation to rethink how the vernacular relationship we have with time is actually reshaping or producing a modernist way of artistic expression. If we think of modernist art or contemporary art as a sort of the objectifying of cultural motifs, from being something cultural, being something as used to being something on the wall and presented in a space as a gallery or etc., then you can see directly how something like the Festival of Al Kharif is exactly that, is the shifting, how to say, is of this lived culture into the culture that is on a white cube wall. But it also gives us an idea that modernism is not necessarily linear, but it is temporal, and it's a frequency in a way or another. It also kind of argues that is modernism always important, and how modernism in Sudan sometimes could be a localized nation building effort. And yeah, that's about it. But I would like to leave you guys with one question. As you can see in the corner, these three questions, but where in Sudan else do we see this type of seasonal modernism? I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to think about it, and then I'm gonna give you an answer. But this is a very popular space in Sudan where we see the same type of behavior in this. Kassala always regularly hosts people coming from Port Sudan during the summer season because of the hot weather. So the people from the area of the Red Sea would migrate towards the south for a cooler atmosphere. And that has influenced the city of Kassala a lot. And it has also reshaped cultural expression in the city. Thank you so much.
Yannis Xenakis was a seminal avant-garde composer, architect, and engineer whose work forged unprecedented connections between music, architecture, mathematics, and philosophy. Trained in civil engineering at the National Technical University of Athens and later active in Paris, Xenakis developed an interdisciplinary practice that challenged conventional conceptions of musical form and architectural space. His collaboration with Le Corbusier between 1947 and 1959 was particularly formative, situating his artistic research within a modernist architectural context shaped by proportional systems, structural innovation, and technological experimentation. Central to Xenakis' theoretical framework is the distinction between two modes of musical construction, one dependent on time and another existing outside of it. The outside time domain encompasses abstract structures, durations, and relational operations, such as points, distances, and functions that can be projected onto the temporal axis but are conceived independently of temporal flow. The temporal mode, by contrast, concerns instantaneous creation and perceptual unfolding. Xenakis regarded outside the time structures can be sustained, constructed, and transcended through human creativity, aligning his compositional thinking with modern processes of formalization and axiomatization. These concepts found a striking synthesis in metastasis. We can see notation for metastasis in the screen, and the Philips Pavilion for the 1958 Brussels World Fair. In metastasis, Xenakis employed Le Corbusier's modular system to organize pitch intervals, durations, dynamics, and timbral transformations, translating architectural proportion into musical structure. The pavilion's hyperbolic paraboloid geometry that we'll see in the next slides. For example, here is a sketch. So the pavilion's hyperbolic paraboloid geometry was derived from the graphical representation the works glissandi, transforming musical time into architectural form. By examining this reciprocal exchange, my talk argues that Xenakis' practice offers a model for understanding communication between mathematics, architecture, and music through shared structural principles. Time emerges not merely as a medium of succession, but as a conceptual bridge between abstract form and sensory experience. Xenakis' evaluation of musical composition is based on the quantity of intelligence carried by the sounds, his own words. For him, the qualification beautiful or ugly makes no sense for sound, nor for the music that derives from it. The quantity of intelligence carried by the sounds must be the true criterion of the validity of a particular music. Again, his own words. As he argues, quotation, to make music means to express human intelligence by sonic means. Xenakis was attracted by the effort to materialize movements of thought through sounds. He mentions, quote again, it is not so much the inevitable use of mathematics that characterizes the attitude of these experiments as the overriding need to consider sound and music as a vast potential reservoir in which knowledge of the laws of thought and the structured creations of thought may find a completely new medium of materialization, for example, of communication. As I mentioned also before, Xenakis distinguishes two modes of musical construction. A first which pertains to time, and a second which is independent of temporal becomingness. The latter includes durations and constructions, relations and operations that refer to elements such as points, distances, functions that belong to and that can be expressed on the time axis. Is then reserved to the instantaneous creation. For him, the outside time structures do exist, and it is the privilege of man not only to sustain them, but to construct them and go beyond them. Xenakis believes that it was Debussy and Messiaen in France who reintroduced the category outside time, but claims that the evolution associated with Debussy's and Messiaen's invention resulted in its own atrophy to the advantage of structures in time. He poses the following question: what does it remain of music once time has been removed? He invites us to distinguish structures, architecture, and sound organisms from their temporal manifestations. Xenakis refers to Plato's Timaeus when he analyzes how the movements of sound cause movements in us. More specifically, he cites a passage from Timaeus which explains how the movements of sounds know how to reason, and for those who do know, reason joy through the imitation of the divine harmony which they realize is perishable movements. As Dimitris Exarchos claims, Xenakis dealt with the question of time by denying its perceived centrality in a way similar to the Parmenidean denial of the question of change. Parmenides understands aeon as a denial of the temporal distinctions, past and future, and as an affirmation of total present simultaneity. For Plato, the stability and unity of aeon are contrasted with the movement and plurality, or better, the numerability of chronos. The distinction between chronos and aeon is related to two modes of individuation, two modes of temporality, according to Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. Xenakis understands the introduction of the calculation of probability in stochastics as a way to respond to the fact that the categories outside time, in time and temporal, were unequally amalgamated in the history of music. He believes that in stochastics, the above categories acquired their fundamental significance and built a coherent and universal synthesis in the past, present, and future. It becomes thus evident that the amalgamation of outside time, in time and temporal categories in Xenakis' work is close to the notion of aeon elaborated by Parmenides and reinvented by Gilles Deleuze. Xenakis' distinction could be related to the differentiation between the notion of aeon and chronos. Christopher Batchers, when analyzes how Xenakis uses the notion of chance in his compositional process, notes, quote, Xenakis is the first in any artistic field both chance and to use it in a way which is acceptable rigorously to modern logic. In the composition of Xenakis' Pythopracta, quote, pitch and duration are distributed probabilistically in the form of glissandi as the work progresses by means of the continuous and gradual transformation of the sound material. For Xenakis, chance is nothing but an extreme case of this controlled disorder. Xenakis understands the composition of music as a fixing in sound of imagined virtualities. He regards his musical, architectural, and visual works as a net whose variable lattices capture virtualities and entwine them in a multitude of ways. For Xenakis, in musical composition, construction must stem from originality, which can be defined in extreme, perhaps in human cases, as the creation of new rules or laws, as far as that is possible. As far as possible meaning original, not yet known, or even foreseeable. Xenakis invite us to reascend to the fountainhead of the mental operations used in composition and attempt to extricate the general principles that are valid for all sorts of music. Despite the fact that he is skeptical vis-à-vis a psychophysiological study of perception, he's interested in understanding the phenomenon of hearing and the thought processes involved when listening to music. For Xenakis, to make music means to express human intelligence by sonic means. I also mentioned this before. The notion of intelligence for him includes not only the peregrinations of pure logic, but also the logic of emotions and intuitions. In his text, The Crisis of Serial Music, he expressed his denial of music. In the composition of Metastasis, which was composed between 1953 and 1955, the 2/3 of the work are based on a serial structure. A question that is posed is that of why Xenakis denounces the serial music. Xenakis notes, in 1954, I denounced linear thought, polyphony, and demonstrated the contradictions of serial music. In its place, I proposed a world of sound masses, vast groups of sound events, clouds, and galaxies, governed by new characteristics, such as density, degree of order, and rate of change, which required definitions and realizations using probability theory. His disapproval of the determinism of serial music is related to his belief that the virtual absolute determinism of serial music constricted the new path opened by the tonal function. His negation vis-à-vis serial music should be understood in conjunction with the distinction he proposes between outside time and temporal categories. In order to better understand Xenakis' critique of musical causality and serialism, we should take into consideration that, quote, in the early and mid-50s, total serialization was regarded as something of a compositional panacea. Xenakis is also skeptical vis-à-vis Boulezi's structures, which was the last and most successful of Boulezi's work to use the technique of integral serialism. In Metastasis, Yannick Xenakis applied certain tools of Le Corbusier's modular to the organization of intervallic structures and the duration of dynamics and timbres. In order to respond to how the communication between mathematics, architecture, and music can take place, we can take as a starting point the use of modular system of proportion in the composition of the notation of Metastasis by Yannick Xenakis. Notes regarding Le Corbusier. So here we can see a sketch of the modular that was a patent by Le Corbusier regarding the proportions, and Xenakis notes regarding Le Corbusier. I discovered on becoming into contact with Le Corbusier that the problems of architecture, as he formulated them, were the same as I encountered in music. Xenakis was interested in the modular because the modular is at once a geometric and an additive series. Xenakis' compositional approach is based on a relationship between music and architecture that goes beyond the metaphoric. His conception is the role of architecture was direct and fundamental by virtue of the modular, which found an application in the very essence of the musical development. Xenakis' earliest glissandi resulted from a direct conversion into sound of a visual element, the line. Following Makis Solomos, we could claim that, quote, the central gesture par excellence of Xenakis may be the linear glissando. For the notation of the metastasis, he used graphs of glissandi, as we saw in the first, in this notation I showed you. We see the glissandi, which look like ruled surfaces of hyperbolic paraboloids, described by him as ruled surfaces of sound. The string glissandos of metastasis, which Xenakis drew in a graph with pitch on the c-axis and the x-axis, look like the structural components he would design later on the Philips pavilion. So you can see the similarities. Here is the sketch of the Philips pavilion. And also in the built artifact, you can see the similarities. Xenakis, during his collaboration with Le Corbusier, which lasted from 1947 to 1959, conceived the Philips Pavilion for the 1958 World's Fair in Brussels. In this case, he applied the hyperbolic paraboloids of the glissandos of metastasis in his design for this pavilion. He tells Varga, quote, "In the Philips Pavilion, I realized the basic ideas of metastasis. As in the music, here too, I was interested in the question of whether it is possible to get from one point to another without breaking the continuity." So this becomes also very evident in this simple sketch he did for the Philips Pavilion. So in metastasis, this problem led to glissandos, while in the pavilion it resulted in the hyperbolic parabola shapes. Xenakis' design for the Philips pavilion was the first self-supporting hyperbolic paraboloid ever built. So it's very innovative structurally as well. Hyperbolic paraboloids, by their nature, are easy to calculate and construct and have their own structural integrity.
Marianna, sorry for the interruption. We wanna
Yes, I just have two sentences, but I
yeah,
can
of
stop
course.
here if it's a problem.
No. You please continue.
Yeah, it's just 4 lines. So Yannis Xenakis conceived referring to a process of modulation of time. So I refer to a quote of him. If it is emitted several times in succession, the events are compared and we conclude that they are identical and no more. Identity and tautology are therefore implied by repetition, but simultaneously another phenomenon subjacent to the first is created by reason of this very repetition. Modulation of time. For Xenakis, the power of musical composition resides in the expression of intelligence through sonic means. I can stop here. So you can see more details about these ideas concerning Xenakis in this chapter also that I have written for my latest book. And it analyzes further the connection with Le Corbusier. Thanks a lot for your attention.